So turning our attention to the conflict and the war between Israel and Hamas and Gaza, we're on the verge of Israel going into Rafah. So this is a very small area. There's a lot of people there, people who've actually sought refuge from other parts of Gaza as well. It's very difficult to see how any assault on that area of serious nature wouldn't be a bloodbath. And yet you're maybe thinking, Sean, that we're seeing signs of, I was going to say victory over Hamas, but certainly an end to the conflict. Where do you think we are?
Yeah, it's been an interesting week, I think, particularly because we've seen for the first time in 31 days, President Biden's been talking to Netanyahu, made it really clear to him, if you go into Rafah, it's going to be a bloodbath, you're not to do it. Netanyahu saying, we're going in. But if you wind the clock back now for a month ago, in fact, it's over a month ago, Netanyahu said, if the hostages aren't out by the 10th of March, we're going in at the start of Ramadan. Ramadan came and went, hasn't gone in. He also challenged his Israeli Defense Forces to come up with a plan for getting rid of the 1.3 million refugees that are in Rafah. No such plan has yet come about. That puts Netanyahu potentially in a position of weakness. Now, meanwhile, the humanitarian situation has been going out of control, and the West has been doing more and more airdrops. We've seen Lord Cameron announcing proudly that the West has provided another massive aid to Gaza. When you actually look at how much it is, it's a tiny fraction of their daily need. But I'm not belittling it. It all helps. But there is a conversation about, is that aid actually helping the Gazan population, but potentially also helping Netanyahu?
Yeah. Well, and we've got the pier, the famous Joe Biden pier, arriving somewhere at some time. And all this continued aid, looking at it through one lens, just legitimizes a continuance, or gives Israel further permission to say, well, that's all fine because that's coming in. So we're going to carry on doing what we're doing over here.
Well, it does reduce the distraction and also potentially, as a military guy, the only way to get the aid in and the volume required is either that pontoon, but that would be weeks away, or open up the land crossings. Now, Israel, for whatever reason, has not enabled that flow of aid through. There's plenty of aid, it just hasn't got through. And there is a sense that this is a distraction. So why am I more positive that we're on the cusp of some form of deal? Well, part of it is because behind the scenes in Cairo, there's still and Doha, there's still a number of negotiations going on. And even though Netanyahu said, we're going to go into to Rafah, he also sent two people out to negotiate. And if you look at this from step back from it all for a moment, Hamas has all but lost. It is no longer, it is a spent force. It knows that if Israel goes into Rafah, that will be the end of Hamas. The leadership are almost certainly looking to how can they go into exile, because whatever happens next, Hamas will no longer be a governing authority in Gaza. So there is a conversation that says those negotiations that are happening now, in which Hamas did offer to release all of the hostages. Yes, they said the Israeli forces had to leave, but they've also in the past talked about allowing these guys, the Hamas leadership, to go into exile. If you put all those ingredients together, the one thing that Netanyahu would not want to go into that negotiation would be in a position of weakness. And having threatened once to go into Rafah and not done it, that might have been seen as a position of weakness. So by reiterating his determination to go in, he keeps his foot on the throat of Hamas.
But he's only got one shot left, I would say, based on what you've just said.
No, exactly. And I'm not part of those negotiations. I may be entirely wrong. But it is interesting watching, if he does go into Rafah without getting rid of the 1.3 million hostages, there will be a bloodbath. And it's very difficult to see how he would avoid the war crimes accusations that would come with that.
So the one variable or the other variable, which, quite frankly, I don't hear too many people talking about, is Iran. Now, we've said before, there's high likelihood that actually this is a proxy war for Iran, and they're using organizations like Hamas to actually front their war based on their objectives in the Middle East, which might be very grand. And what have they managed to do? They've managed to isolate Israel internationally at the moment. A lot of money has been spent on war, depleting their military capability. Okay, from Iran's point of view, I don't think maybe they care about some of the other things. A lot of people in Gaza have died. Does Iran care? Maybe not. Hamas maybe get, in terms of physical numbers, get wiped out. Iran's got plenty of other terrorist organizations, fighting organizations, states or semi-states, willing to fight for them. So maybe Iran, despite what happens with some sort of settlement or whatever, maybe Iran is saying, I've achieved step one in my objective.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever know what the full landscape looks like. I must confess, after years of studying when I was in my military time, the more you studied, the more you realise you didn't know. I think most people subscribe to the view that the dark shadow of Iran is behind all of this. For me, you can't change the past. What you can do is change the future. And part of the challenge for the international community is saying that whatever's happened, how do you avoid that happening again? How do you avoid Iran sponsoring terrorism if that's what they were doing in Gaza? How do you create a peaceful situation where two nations can coexist, where Palestinians, their right to security, their right to prosperity, their right to hope is also respected, as well as Israel's right to safety, security, hope, prosperity. And goodness knows how that's to be solved, but I'm confident that will not be solved by Israel and the Palestinians sitting down. That will have to be the global community. And if that is polarized into a West versus Arab nations, I think that will be a fundamental failure. And therefore, it's trying to create rather than making Iran the bad guy, but it's making sure that influence can't be brought to bear in the same way in the future.
Well, I think, and I'm pretty sure we're going to build on this over the coming weeks, I think what you've just touched upon, Sean, might just turn out to be one of the biggest factors in our total understanding as to what's going on, because it feels to me like the thing is boiling and this is really just one part of it. So
I agree. And one of the things you and I have talked a bit about off camera here is that the danger of the media is we tend to focus on the symptoms. We see Hamas fighting, we see Israel responding. What is the disease that's causing that? Because if you don't understand what the disease is, how on earth can you solve it? You can put a sticky plaster over the symptoms, but if you don't deal with the disease, it will come back. And the worry here is that this situation with Hamas has bubbled up several times over history. This has been a catastrophic event, not only for Israel, but particularly for the Palestinians. And I don't think anybody can look at it and think that what is happening is right. It just doesn't feel right. And therefore, if we are collectively to avoid this happening again, it can't be a sticky plaster solution. It's got to be, and I think one of the things that we're never going to solve it, but I think, as we've agreed, we're going to try and explore some of the facets of this to try to hold our politicians to account so they don't just wheel out a sticky plaster, claim success, move on, and we're sat here again in a decade's time talking about exactly the same thing.